Now, today's speaker knows firsthand the need to protect the most vulnerable in our community. The abduction of Elizabeth Smart was one of the most followed child abduction cases of our time. Elizabeth was abducted on June 5, 2002, and her captors controlled her by threatening to kill her and her family if she tried to escape. Fortunately, the police safely returned Elizabeth back to her family on March 12, 2003. She had been held prisoner for 9 grueling months. Through this traumatic experience, Elizabeth has become an advocate for change related to child abduction recovery programs and national legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elizabeth Smart.
Thank you. Yesterday, I had the privilege of touring Project Harmony, and it is absolutely incredible. I've seen many CJCs, CACs all around the country, and truly what you have here is extraordinary and very special. And with that being said and acknowledged, I'm going to go in a little bit different direction than I had originally planned on starting my comments. After I was rescued, the day I was rescued, I often talk about it as being one of the happiest days of my life, which is absolutely true. It felt like the dreams that had been snatched away from me for 9 months had all of a sudden been given back. But it was also terrifying. It was also highly traumatic. The officers that did approach me when I was with my captors, they had never been in a situation like this before. I don't believe there was a best practices. Not to mention, I don't think anybody thought that I was going to come back alive. So ultimately, I did end up being handcuffed and very aggressively questioned. I wasn't told where I was being taken. When they brought me to the Sandy police station, I thought I was going to jail. I was brought into a small little room where, once again, I wasn't informed of what was going to happen next. So I thought that was the holding cell that they were putting me in until they booked me. And then I was left in that room until my dad appeared. And it was only when my dad was in there hugging me that I finally felt like everything was going to be okay. Because my dad was there, and he wasn't going to let anyone else hurt me the way that these 2 people had hurt me the last 9 months. And even if I went to jail, it would be okay, because my dad would still be there for me. I was brought to the main police headquarters in downtown Salt Lake, where I was reunited with my mom, but only for a minute before I was taken away from them again, taken away from my parents, and brought to be very aggressively questioned yet again. And then after that, I was brought to the hospital, where I feel like I was poked and prodded with every needle that they had in that building, after which I was finally brought home that night. The following morning, I was brought to the Children's Justice Center in Salt Lake, where I was told I had to talk to these 2 psychiatrists. And at that time, I didn't understand why. I just knew that I didn't have a choice and that I had to. And so I went into this room, and it was with 2 men, psychiatrists, around the same age as my captor, both of them clearly religious. Not that there's anything necessarily bad with that, but I just come out of a situation where I had been abused repeatedly, all in the name of religion. And then I was what felt like forced to talk about the worst moments of my life in a way that I was very uncomfortable with. After I left that day, I never wanted to talk about what happened to me ever again. And I never wanted to speak to a counselor or a therapist, because I thought that's what these 2 men were. Now, in hindsight, I can say that those 2 men, my parents had been told that if I would speak to these 2 psychiatrists, that they could stand proxy for me during the trial. That ultimately did not happen, but I can understand why everyone thought that was a good idea. But from that time moving forward, as I mentioned, I didn't want to share my story with anyone. I felt so much shame over what happened, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. I felt like I was the only one who had ever experienced anything like this because I never saw any other survivors or anyone openly speaking about abduction, abuse, rape, violence. I'd never heard anyone else talk about it from a personal point of perspective. Actually, I never heard anyone else talk about it, period. So I really felt like I was the only one who had ever experienced that. And I didn't want people to look at me differently. I didn't want people to judge me for what had happened. So I didn't share what happened to me. And it wasn't until my case went to trial, which was the better part of a decade later. Actually, my case had to move from the state courts to the federal courts because the statute of limitations was about to expire. And my captors would have walked free had that happened. Even though, in my mind, that seemed just ridiculous because everybody knew everyone knew that they were the ones that had kidnapped me. How could that possibly happen? So it wasn't until I had to testify in court, almost a decade later, that I shared what happened to me. And yesterday, as I was touring through Project Harmony, I was so incredibly impressed with what you have here. I mean, it is amazing just how many different entities you have under one roof, and not just how different they all are, but how they are able to work together. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen that many different organizations and law enforcement all under one roof working together in harmony. I mean, that just makes sense for the title being Project Harmony, doesn't it? Right there. But truly just amazing. And I think back to the day that I was rescued. How different would it have been if someone who had been trauma informed, if the officers had a best practices or had worked with victims before, had been the ones to approach me. And instead of being taken from police station to hospital, to be able to go to one location, share my story one time, and not just one time, but have someone to walk beside me my whole journey through healing. Have someone there to say that I'm not the only one who has experienced this, that I don't feel like I need to hide it or be ashamed of what's happened, because this problem, unfortunately, is hugely common and is so prevalent everywhere. There's not a neighborhood that it doesn't happen in. It would have meant so much to me to have that, and to have just someone walk beside me and hold my hand instead of what did ultimately happen. That is so amazing. When I speak to victims now, there's usually 3 things that I tell them. The first one is that what's happened to you is not your fault. You did not deserve this to happen to you. There's nothing that you did wrong. You could be running down the street naked and you still don't deserve to be hurt, to be abused, to be raped, to be trafficked. You didn't deserve any of that to happen to you. The second thing that I tell victims and survivors is that there isn't anything that anyone else can do to you that can take away your value as a human being. As I've met with other survivors, I have just felt how, after experiencing rape and sexual violence, how easy it is to feel like you're dirty, to feel like you're filthy, to feel like you're less than everyone else. And so I want them to know there isn't anything that someone else can do to you that can take away your value. And third, the last thing that I want them to know, which is, I think most importantly, is that yes, this happened and this is a part of your life. And I have no doubt it will affect your decisions down the road, it'll affect your future down the road, but it does not actually have to define you. It doesn't have to be 100% of who you are. You actually get to decide who you are by the choices that you make every single day. And as I, again, was touring the center yesterday, and they were showing me the different rooms and the different procedures and how everyone is coming together to make sure the focus remains on the children, to make sure the focus remains on the survivor, that's just what I couldn't help but thinking. That is exactly what they're doing. They're helping these survivors to realize that, yes, this is terrible. And yes, let's help you get through it. You're not alone. But this does not have to be the end of your life. I mean, that is their ultimate goal, isn't it? To help them move beyond what has happened to them and to succeed and to live a happy and healthy life. And for me, I think that is what is so inspiring about Project Harmony. I mean, I know I've said there's a lot of things that's very inspiring, but that is certainly one of them. And finally, walking out of there, I got to walk past the Be Someone wall, and to see how many of you as community members have contributed to making Project Harmony a reality and not just a dream, and as big as it is. I mean, holy cow, that is absolutely incredible. What an amazing community you all have here to have created that, and that the initiative that you've taken to become someone, helping Project Harmony, helping each one of these families and survivors. So, good heavens, God bless you. Thank you. I do feel very fortunate because I do come from a loving family. And honestly, again, growing up, I had never heard anyone speak openly about sexual violence. I mean, I remember learning what sex was, but at the same time, nobody ever told me that there's a difference between sex and rape. So in my little 14-year-old mind, it all was the same thing. These were not conversations being had whatsoever. And I remember thinking the world was a very black and white place, that good things happen to good people, that bad things happen to bad people, that justice always won. And that's kind of how I went through life. I was ready to graduate from junior high, which I was very excited about. I was very excited to go to high school because I was pretty awkward as a kid. I was pretty shy, and I thought that if I made it to high school that all of a sudden that would just evaporate, and so I was very excited about that. I remember the day before graduating from junior high. I mean, it was a good day. There was nothing bad about it. There were no, premonitions of anything bad about to come. And I remember going to sleep that night, and I shared a room with my little sister. She's about 5 years younger than me, and the next thing I remember after going to bed that night was waking up and hearing a man's voice. And that didn't happen in my home. Men didn't just sneak into my house. I lived in a nice home. I lived in a nice neighborhood. Those kinds of things didn't happen. So I didn't immediately respond because that couldn't actually be real. And so I just laid there. And then the voice repeated again, saying the same words, saying, "Don't make a sound. I have a knife at your neck. Get up and come with me." And the second time that I heard that, I remember feeling there was a knife line across my neck, and I remember feeling someone's hand on my arm trying to pull me out of bed, and I was terrified. I mean, up until that moment in my life, I didn't really have big reasons to be afraid. I was afraid of doing poorly on a school test. I was afraid of going to my music teacher if I wasn't prepared. That was scary. I was afraid of the original movie of Jumanji with Robin Williams. I hated that movie. It scared me so much. Those were the kinds of things that scared me as a kid. And so having a stranger in my room holding a knife to my neck, I mean, that was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. And in that moment, you think of all the safety education that you're given as a child. Don't talk to strangers, look both ways when you're crossing the street, don't take candy from people you don't know, which I would just like to point out. We have a holiday celebrating taking candy from people we don't know. Not that I'm against Halloween. I love Halloween, but should probably think our messaging through a little bit more on that. But all of this safety education that I had been taught growing up. None of it actually helped in that moment. No one had told me what I should do if someone broke into my home in the middle of the night and held a knife to my neck and told me to go with them. So I felt like I didn't have an option. I felt like the only thing I could do was to go with this man. And so I got up and I did exactly as this man said. I remember he led me out through the back of my house, and I remember he led me up through my backyard. And right as we were about to cross the street, because behind my home, or the neighborhood that I grew up in, sits up on one of the mountainsides surrounding Salt Lake, and there really only was one more road behind us before it was just mountains. And we were about to cross this road when all of a sudden he pushed me down behind some bushes. And I remember I was just able to lift my head up enough just to kind of see through the bushes, and I saw some headlights coming towards us. And I remember just thinking in my mind, wow, he has this so planned out. No one is ever going to find me because the police are going to come. They're going to bring their dogs. They're going to track my scent all the way up to here. But because this must be a getaway car, I'm just going to disappear. The dogs won't be able to find me. No one will find me. Well, the car, it kept coming and it didn't stop, and it actually passed right in front of us. And I remember when it passed right in front of us, I remember seeing the word police written along the side of the car. And I remember in that moment thinking, it's going to be fine. Everything is going to be just fine. The police, they're magic. They know that I've been taken. They're here to rescue me. Everything is going to be just fine. But of course, the police officer in that car didn't know I'd been taken yet. He didn't know that I was there being held down at knife point behind the bushes. He would have had no clue. He was just doing a drive, a neighborhood check at night, that's all, I think. Anyway, as soon as this police was around the corner from where we were at, there was my captor pulling me up off the ground again and having me run as fast as I could across the street and head up into the mountains on the other side. And I remember we got farther and farther into the mountains. We'd gotten off the trail. It was really just fighting our way through brush and climbing at that point. And I remember stopping and turning to my captor and saying, well, if you're just going to rape and kill me, could you please do it here? Because I wanted my parents to know what had happened to me. I wanted them to know that I hadn't run away. Not that I actually truly thought they would think that, because I am not a rebellious person. I was not a rebellious kid. I've always been, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, I'm just saying it as a fact. I've always been a little bit, just mostly vanilla. And that's okay. I am happy to be just vanilla. That's great. And that's kind of how I was as a kid too. I didn't really fight with my parents. My mom was always my best friend growing up. I never snuck out of my house. I always came back when my parents told me to. I did what my parents said. That was just kind of who I was. So I didn't think they actually thought I'd run away, but I just wanted them to know what had happened to me. And I remember when I said that to my captor, he looked at me and he smiled and he said, oh, I'm not going to rape and kill you yet. And we kept on going, and we went a ways farther, and I stopped him again, and I said, well, don't you realize what you're doing? If you get caught, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison, but I promise, if you let me go, it'll be like this never happened. Just please let me go. You don't even have to walk me home. I can find my own way home. Just please let me go. And I remember he looked at me again, and he smiled again, and he said, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly what the consequences are. The only difference is, I'm not going to get caught. And that was more or less all the conversation that we had. I just remember the whole time being terrified that somehow I had missed my chance. Somehow I had missed my opportunity to escape. Looking back now as an adult and looking back on that night, there was never an opportunity for me to escape. He didn't leave me alone. He was always right there. He had his knife on me. It was very difficult terrain. We were making our way over. There was just no way I could have gotten away that night. I remember we crossed right over the top of the mountain and we started down the other side, and we came to this stand of trees, which just looked to me, it looked like all the other trees would pass through. And I remember going into the stand and seeing how part of the mountainside had been leveled out, and there was a tent set up, and outside the tent, there were tarps lying on the ground, and there were some tarps in the trees. And I remember there was this woman appearing, and the first thing she did was she came up to me and she hugged me. And at first, I thought, it's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. There's a woman here. If there's a woman here, nothing truly terrible can happen to me. Well, she brought me inside the tent. She sat me down on this upturned bucket. She'd brought in this little blue basin. It was full of water, and she took my shoes off, and she started washing my feet. And then she reached to take off my pajamas. Well, I was very, very shy as a child, very self-conscious. And I mean, getting changed for gym class was already traumatic for me. So having a complete stranger try to undress me and sponge bathe me was far beyond the realm of anything that I would ever be comfortable with. I remember just begging and pleading with her to leave me alone. Ultimately, she did, which at that point in time, I had no idea what a big deal that was. I mean, this is the kind of woman who never changed her mind about anything. But in that moment, she did. I remember she got up and she scooped up her clothes and she turned around and she walked out of the tent. And in came this man, and he had changed out of like the sweatpants and sweatshirt that he wore initially to kidnap me in, and he'd put on a long sort of tunic-like robe. It was identical to the one that I had been given to put on. And then he came in and he knelt down next to me and started talking. And truthfully, at first I wasn't paying attention to what he was saying because this was so far from anything that I ever expected to experience in my life. It was hard for me in that moment really to make sense of this situation. It felt impossible actually to make sense of the situation. But then I had the thought that maybe I should listen to what he had to say because maybe there'd be some clue or some hint as to why this was happening and what was going to happen next. Was there ever going to be an opportunity for me to get back to my family? Was there a way to get them a message, something? And I only heard the last sentence that he said, which was when he told me that I was now his wife. Of course, of everything I expected to hear, that was not one of them. I remember just screaming out no and trying to explain to him why this wasn't okay, why this wasn't legal, why he couldn't do this to me. And nothing I said made a difference. In fact, his response to everything I said was the same thing, which was, it's now time to consummate our marriage. And I had lived a pretty sheltered life growing up, and I did not know what that sentence meant. I didn't know what it meant to consummate a marriage. I'd never heard that before. And so I just sat there and wondered, what on earth does he mean? And just, again, for your frame of reference, I mean, I did not have a great education on what sex was. It was actually my neighbor, my friend, not the parents. She was my age. My best friend who lived across the street who told me what sex was. And I remember when she told me what sex was, I was absolutely horrified. I mean, I was so grossed out. I remember looking at her and just being like, what is wrong with you? How would you ever even dream that up? That is the nastiest thing I have ever heard in my life. And I remember her looking at me and she's like, no, Elizabeth, it's real. I promise. My parents had the doctor down the street come over to our house and sit down with all of us together as a family. And if you want to know what awkward is like, that is awkward. And they explained to us about sex and the whole reproductive system. Did you know that's how babies are made? And I was like, no, I know how babies are made. My mom told me. She said you grow up and you fall in love and then you get married, and then when you're ready to have a baby, you pray. And when you pray hard enough, God sends you a baby. Also have to admit, since my mom did tell me that, I was scared to pray too hard in case I accidentally prayed myself pregnant. Yeah. My friend, she just looked at me and she was like, Elizabeth, are you serious? That is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. Your last name's Smart. Like, you don't even live up to it. You're not even close to it. She's like, I promise you, this is how babies are made. Sex is actually real. Like, grown-ups do it all the time. And I was like, oh, no, they don't. And I just remember just looking at her and being like, you're trying to tell me that like magic pee comes out of a man's penis inside a woman? And that's what gets them pregnant. She's like, yeah, it's magic pee. Anyway, that's how I learned what sex was. So again, I think you can see how that conversation would not have expanded into consent, true intimacy versus sexual violence. I mean, it was two 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds talking about it. Anyway, so back to this mountainside, I didn't know what he meant. And then I had this thought come to my mind of what he could mean, what consummating a marriage could possibly mean. And I remember in that moment thinking, no, there's no way that can happen to me. There's no way that one human could be so evil to do that to another human. Unfortunately, it didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter what I did, because ultimately he forced me onto the ground and raped me. And when he was finished, he stood up and he smiled and he turned around and walked out of the tent like it wasn't a big deal. But for me, that felt so devastating. Physically, I was in a lot of pain. I remember looking down and seeing blood running down my legs. Emotionally, I was in a lot of pain, but also spiritually. I'd been raised in a very conservative, religious household where I don't know how many lessons in Sunday school I was taught about chastity and purity and virtue, and how all of that seemed to boil down to one thing, which was don't have sex before marriage. And again, no one ever taught to me about the difference between true intimacy versus abuse or rape. That was never talked about. So now all of a sudden, on top of all this emotional and physical pain, I'm also feeling like I'm unworthy on a whole new level, on a spiritual level. I felt like I wasn't lovable, I wasn't good enough. There'd be no point in trying to rescue me. There'd be no point in trying to save me, because I wasn't worthy of it anymore. And I just remember lying on the ground feeling hopeless. And at that point, I honestly don't remember if I fell asleep or if I just passed out. But the next thing I remember was waking up, and there was this man kneeling over me. And he had a piece of metal cable around my ankle. And he was crushing bolts into place so that I couldn't run away. And I saw how I was chained between two trees that had just enough movement for me to lie down inside the tent, and then just enough movement for me to reach the bucket. And that was as far as I could move. And I remember as I looked at this hidden campsite, I saw the big gallon containers full of water. I saw trunks full of food. I saw how well thought out this whole campsite was. And the thought occurred to me that they didn't plan on actually killing me, at least not right in this moment. They planned on keeping me for at least some period of time. And how long was that going to be? Was it days? Weeks? Years? What if it was so long I forgot who I actually was? And that thought scared me. So I started to think of everyone and everything that was important, and my parents were at the very top of that list. And I had one very specific memory come to mind where I'd come home from school one day and I was pretty upset, and my mom had asked me what was wrong, and I told her how I had been bullied at school, and she'd sat down and tried to make me feel better, but then she went on and she said, you will meet so many people in your lifetime, and opinions will be made all the time, and you won't always understand why people like you, don't like you, but of all these opinions that matter, you need to decide whose opinions actually count. And I can help you out with the first few opinions. The first person's opinion who you should worry about is God's. The second person's opinion who you should worry about, well, that would be mine. And I am your mother, and I will always love you. I may not love all the decisions that you make. I may not love all the places you decide to go or the people you decide to be with, but I will always love you. And nothing can ever change that. And as I sat on this mountainside, remembering this memory of her telling me that she would love me no matter what, I realized that she was right. That even though I had been kidnapped, raped, chained up, she would still love me and she would still want me back. And for me, that was worth surviving for. That was enough. Even if nobody else ever wanted to associate with me ever again, if nobody else ever wanted to have anything to do with me, that would be okay, because knowing that my mom still loved me and wanted me, that would be worth surviving for. So I made up my mind I'd do whatever it took to survive. It didn't matter what it was. I was going to do whatever it took. And truly, that is how I survived the next 9 months. Again, the day of my rescue, yes, on one hand, it was absolutely one of the happiest days of my life. On the other hand, it was also pretty traumatic. But I do remember going home that night after I had been at the different police stations and the hospital. I remember going home that night and walking inside my house and feeling like a princess, feeling like everything that had been taken had all of a sudden been given back. I mean, looking down and seeing carpet and running water, I don't think I've ever appreciated hot water so much in my life as I did in that moment. I mean, I had not showered for 9 months, and having not just one shower in my home, but multiple showers, that felt like the ultimate luxury. That night, I remember my parents being so worried about me, and they're like, "Oh, we can all have a family sleepover in our bedroom. Won't that be fun?" And I just remember looking at my parents being like, "No, I've done my time on the ground. I'm going to sleep in my bed. I promise I will still be here in the morning." Looking back, and as a parent now, I don't think those were probably the most comforting words my parents could have heard from me right in that moment. And actually, I remember waking up multiple times that night to see both of my parents just hovering over me, making sure that I was still there. And the next morning, I still was there. But again, lots of people came to me. Lots of people said, "I'm here if you want to talk to me. You can share anything you want with me. It's fine." But because I felt so alone, I didn't feel like anyone could understand what I'd went through. And I felt like no one else had ever experienced anything similar to what I had experienced. But now, here we are 22 years later since I was rescued, and unfortunately, I can say with 100% assurity that actually what happened to me is not uncommon. And what happened to me actually happens every single day to so many. I know I'm not the only survivor in this room right now, and I have gotten to a point where I am actually grateful that what happened to me came at the hands of strangers, because unfortunately statistics show us that most children who experience sexual violence and abuse, they know their perpetrator. Usually it's someone who should be there to protect them and to be their first line of defense. And I feel so lucky that that was not my story, because when I go to bed at night, and from the day that I was rescued moving forward, I never was worried who else was going to crawl into bed next to me. I can't imagine how much more difficult that would be if I was scared to go home, if I was scared to go to sleep, if I was scared because the people who were supposed to love and protect me were the ones abusing me, and how much harder that would be to move forward with my life. I will forever be grateful to every person who hears that call to work and serve in this field and fight against human trafficking and fight against sexual exploitation and abuse and violence. I will forever, ever be grateful to those people, because this is such a heavy topic. It is so hard to carry it around all the time. I loved that each one of these honorees, but specifically when the sergeant was saying that it's important to talk about fantasy football or acknowledge your life outside of this work, because it is so heavy, and it it does wear on your soul so much. And I am just so grateful to everyone who has joined in this fight. It's crazy to think that there's only a limited amount of space in this area. There's only a limited amount of people who can make a difference. I think that's another thing that I truly love about Project Harmony. And now it just sounds like I'm singing their praises, which I am and will gladly do so, because they have proven, honestly, to the world that there is enough space for everyone and that we need everyone. The more people coming together to make a difference, the better. Because wouldn't it be amazing if we could put an end to violence and exploitation, especially of children? Wouldn't that be a miracle? That would be absolutely incredible. So with that being said, I again just want to say thank you so much for having me here with you today. Thank you so much to Project Harmony, to all of the people who work there, to all of the different agencies who are sacrificing their time and probably their emotional well-being to this cause. And thank you so much to everyone who has come here today and who has continued to support Project Harmony in all their endeavors. So thank you, and God bless you.